Is the government to blame for the crisis in Sri Lanka?
Well, the government and the Tamil Tigers were to blame because they decided to scuttle the peace agreement that they had and to go back to fighting. The Tamil Tigers said from the beginning that they wanted an independent homeland. The government wasn't willing to give it to them. And the Tigers did everything they could to scuttle the ceasefire agreement. Unfortunately, the government was also willing for political reasons. Their constituency didn't like the ceasefire agreement, and they wanted to impose a military solution. So they're both to blame for the general conflict. For the specific incidents, it just depends on the situation.
And what about the protection of civilians? What does humanitarian law state about protecting civilians?
Well, in an armed conflict, each party has to take all possible precautions to protect civilians. They can't target civilian objects. They have to use proportional force, which means they can't use indiscriminate force, which means you don't set off a grenade near a pack of civilians. You don't send a shell into a heavily populated area unless there's an overwhelming military purpose. And what we've seen in recent weeks is a bloodbath in what the government set up as a no-fire zone, which really became a free-fire zone, as they forced the Tamil Tigers and all the civilians, hundreds of thousands of them, it appears, in retrospect, into a small sliver of land up against the ocean. And they repeatedly shelled the area. The government said for a long time they weren't using heavy weapons. They were taking all precautions. They used the language of international law, but their behavior was often just the opposite. So many humanitarian workers who said this was the worst thing they had ever seen. We had the International Committee of the Red Cross making public statements, which were very rare, saying this is the worst, the director of operations said this is the worst humanitarian crisis he had ever seen. Begging the international community to support them and begging the Sri Lankan government to slow down their military operations and protect civilians. Just to give you an example, the International Committee of the Red Cross has had outstanding for months a request for visas for 40 doctors, surgeons, to go in and provide medical care to the wounded, and the Sri Lankan government has said no. That should be an international outrage. It should be a headline. It should be something Ban Ki-moon and the Security Council were breathing down the necks of the Sri Lankan government to reverse. Because what possible reason can there be to keep doctors out of a conflict area so they can treat the wounded? Yet the Sri Lankan government didn't want them there because they didn't want foreign eyes and ears near the fighting.